with the mammals, see if they're carnivorous, the canines are going to be really well adapted for catching prey and then essentially cutting pieces of the meat to ingest. If they're herbivores, the molars are primarily designed for grinding. They're not like daggers, they're more for grinding. And then you have the incisors, which are essentially for snipping vegetation, like leaves and grasses and things like that. So then there is a whole group of mammals called omnivores, and that includes us. You guys know what omni means? Close. It's actually everything. Omni means everything. So omnivorous means you eat everything. So it could be vegetation, or it could be other animals, of course. All right, now the other thing is gas exchange systems. So aquatic organisms that are really, really simple don't need a circulatory system. They don't need a gill because gases diffuse in and out of the cells directly over the surface of the body. And the same holds true for our flatworm friend here because it is just really simple. And so it is also flat. That's the important thing to understand. Because it's flat, the individual cells can also exchange gases with their environment. So there's no need for a respiratory system and then a circulatory system to help distribute the gases and nutrients. In the case of insects, they have what we call a tracheal system. And do we have a trachea? You guys remember? Where is it? That's right, the windpipe. And you see how these tubes, the tracheal tubes, are ridged, just like our trachea. Because when would you ever want your trachea to collapse?
You wouldn't.
Never, right. You'd never want it to collapse. So these are always open, and there's always air going in there. And it's so well distributed throughout the insect that there's always plenty of oxygen available to it. All right, now, if you're an aquatic arthropod, like a crustacean, like this crawdad, for example, you're going to need gills, because these guys are complex, and they do have a circulatory system, but it's an open circulatory system. And you guys ever eat crab? Mm-hmm. You pull one of the legs off, and what's on the other end? You guys ever notice that? No?
Wait.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, the clear.
It looks it looks like cartilage, right? And it's kind of feather shaped, sort of.
Yeah.
Well, here's the deal. Follow me, Charlie. One of the characteristics of crustaceans is that all of their legs are actually forked. In other words, they're made up of two parts. They're like this. And if you've ever paid attention to, not these, but the hind legs of a crawdad, you would see that they're like this. And we have some preserved crawdads over there. You can look at the back legs, all those little back legs along the abdomen. They're forked like this. But you see how the walking legs are not, right? They don't appear forked. Well, they actually technically are. It's just that one of the forks is inside the body, and it is that feathery gill-like structure. So in other words, it's this stuff here. Yeah, it's been modified into a gill. And you notice how crabs and lobsters and crawdads have these, how their carapace, the shell, is kind of made up of these segments, right? With seams. Well, think about this. As long as those gills stay moist, air will actually permeate through these sutures and allow them to collect oxygen. That's why crabs can hang out underwater. I mean, outside of water is what I mean. You guys ever notice that? Like, crabs can hang out outside of water for a while. So as long as these things don't dry up, a crab can hang out of water. Once it starts to sense that these things are kind of drying out, it's time to go back in underwater. All right, so Oh, and as I mentioned before, every time you have a respiratory surface like a gill, remember it's about surface area, a lot of branches, and essentially just spreading little projections out that increase the surface area. And as I told you, our lungs are essentially the same way. It's just that instead of sticking out, they've been inverted inside, and we also have to keep them moist in order to be able to exchange oxygen with the environment. Okay, so now circulatory systems. Again, sponges, no cells, no organs, no circulatory system. Cnidarians just simply are able to diffuse gases across the surface of the body. No need for gills or a circulatory system to distribute the gases and nutrients. There are two types of circulatory systems among animals, and some of them have what I told you guys in lecture is called a open circulatory system, and it's called that because it doesn't really narrow down into capillaries that then feed the interstitial fluids. Instead, the blood and the lymphatic fluid are one and the same, and it just spills out into the interstitial fluids that surround the cells and is recollected over on another end. But as I mentioned to you, in many cases, invertebrates that have an open circulatory system also tend to move very slowly because it's somewhat inefficient at delivering enough oxygen and nutrients to the cells. And then there's things like insects, which actually have an open circulatory system. But I mentioned the tracheal system earlier, the respiratory structures. And see, the tracheal system is so efficient at delivering oxygen to the animal that it can do with an open circulatory system. So essentially, the air is coming in through the spiracles or tracheal pores, as they're called, and it's providing the oxygen. And then they have this relatively simple circulatory system that pumps the fluids around. And that's how they're able to get enough oxygen to all the tissues, and that's why insects do move relatively quickly despite having an open circulatory system. So again, it's being compensated by this very efficient respiratory system. So more complex animals, and then some that are specially adapted, have what we call a closed circulatory system. So again, that's kind of like what we have. The arteries narrow down into eventually capillaries, and then those essentially turn into venules, and then veins that return the blood back to the heart. And see, the blood never leaves the circulatory system. Gases and nutrients can diffuse directly through the capillaries and nourish the interstitial fluids that are bathing the cells. Now, there are some exceptions. For example, these cephalopods, octopus and squid, they actually have a closed circulatory system, unlike their relatives, the snails. And this is why squid and octopus are able to swim so fast. Now, movement and skeletal systems are another really important thing among all animals. So as sort of a demonstration of what's called the hydrostatic system, we have water balloons. And you've all probably played with a water balloon, right? So you squeeze it, and you notice how the balloon essentially extends, right? So that's because I'm squeezing like this. And what these guys have are sets of muscles. So if you think of a sea anemone like this, and these are the tentacles, they actually have what are called circular muscles that circle the body, and then they have what are called longitudinal muscles that go lengthwise along the body. So when sea anemones expand, see, if you imagine my fingers are the circular muscles, they simply squeeze those, and that expands the body. And then when they want to contract, they just pull or contract those longitudinal muscles and essentially just compress the body. So that's what's called the hydrostatic skeleton, because it's all water and the water creates the resistance.